All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this, I guess, Monday, now early afternoon. I would like to start off by thanking our panelists, Marissa, Harshad, Santi, and Max, for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. In terms of some really quick logistics things before we get into the heart of the panel, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please raise your hand, and you can find that under the reactions tab, or you can go ahead and just write the question to one of our wonderful behind the scenes logistics fairies, which for the sake of this event are Angelica, Kara, and Megan, and they'll let me know, and that way the questions can be disseminated. But the format of this panel, I'm going to go ahead and start off by asking the first few questions. Then there will be time at the end for about a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. And then there will be breakout rooms, and every panelist will be in a separate breakout room. So if you have a question for a specific panelist, you will have the chance to ask them that. So with that prelude out of the way, I guess I'd like to introduce myself and then ask the panelists to do the same. My name is Yanis Luchistea. I am a third year in the comparative literature department. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also one of this year's co-directors of Beyond Academia. I am the speakers lead. So with that, could I ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, your names, preferred programs, preferred pronouns, your programs or departments, and your year in those programs. So there's no particular order. So maybe just for the sake of this, Marissa, Harshad, Santi, and then Max. That's just how you appear on my screen.
Hi, I'm Marissa. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a fourth year in applied science and technology, which for people who aren't familiar with it is a kind of build your own major within engineering. So my focus is applied math and computer science. And did that cover, was there something else I was supposed to say? Good.
Hi, I'm Harshad. I'm a fifth year in environmental sciences, policy, and management. I'm a wildlife ecologist, so I study large animals and their behavior and ecology. My pronouns are he, him, his. And sorry, what's the last thing again?
I think you got everything. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Santi. I'm entering fifth year in the chemical biology graduate program by way of molecular and cell biology. My pronouns are he, him, his, that series. And I think that was it, right? Sorry.
Hi, my name is Max Keisler. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a sixth year in the comparative literature program with a designated emphasis in film studies.
All right, thank you so much to each of you. So we're actually going to start maybe in a part of grad school that often gets decentered, which is I wanted to ask each of you about what extracurricular activities you do outside of your academic research, how you got into them, and what you feel the value is that they bring to you either in the context of your responsibilities as a grad student or like just as a human generally, and or. So whoever would like to start.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. So as far as extracurriculars go for graduate school, I started off pretty early by volunteering with like local schools in the Bay Area. When I was in undergrad, I didn't see a lot of scientists that looked like me or spoke Spanish and things like that. So I figured it would be good to start off by giving back to the local community, just because the Bay Area. I grew up in Florida, which is depends on where you grew up. It can be diverse or can be not diverse. And it just so happened I grew up somewhere that wasn't diverse. And so moving to the Bay Area, it was pretty clear that there were a lot of Latinx folk here. And so I started off by volunteering in middle schools and also mentoring community college students in the lab that I work in. And then also pretty quickly transitioned to working in science communication with the Berkeley Science Review, which has been kind of the main focus of like my extracurriculars outside of lab. I started off as a designer, making illustrations, scientific illustrations, and I eventually went on to be the art director for the last year of Berkeley Science Review, which involved putting together the magazine and designing the cover and stuff like that.
I can go next. So I think what I discovered when I joined Berkeley is that it's this huge university which has just so many opportunities for you to do a bunch of different things. And so in the last 2 or 3 years, I started doing a bunch of martial arts. So there's a couple of clubs in the evenings. There's actually many clubs in the evenings for pretty much any martial art you can think of. And it's been amazing. Like I had no experience before in any of them, but it's just phenomenal. And it just works so well for my mental health that it's amazing. It's almost meditative, which kind of sounds strange when you're talking about an art where you're kicking and punching and yelling for 2 hours. But as I tell myself, it's better to kick and yell and punch at random people rather than my advisors and my lab mates, which I sometimes feel like doing. So that's been amazing. And the other thing which I kind of realized after getting into academia is, because I come from a completely non-academia background, is the sheer flexibility that we have. At least before the pandemic, or even a little bit when things were okay, is just traveling whenever I can. And there's so many amazing places close by. And this kind of flexibility that you get during a PhD, you'll probably never have in your life. So I'm like of the types who's like, I'd rather work like crazy 80-hour weeks and then take time off for a couple of weeks and just go travel somewhere, because I don't think I can do that in any other job.
I don't know if you have anything you wanted to say, Marissa, so please stop me if you do, but just I was just going to chime in that in terms of extracurriculars, my first years as a grad student, I had so many forms of part-time employment that I really did not have any time to pursue sort of enriching extracurriculars, but fortunately in more recent years, I've been able to, and it like drastically has changed my life for the better in terms of, being able to find time to be in poetry groups with friends, or swimming or cycling. Those are the sorts of things I've been able to do more recently.
Yeah, I definitely know what Max has like about having extra jobs and stuff. I think my first few years of grad school too, that was my situation. But now I have a 9-month-old baby. So that is my extracurricular activity at the moment, is, being a mother, which is fantastic. And I think I really benefited from being able to have a lot of really honest conversations with other women in STEM and other parents who kind of came before me when I was making that decision about if I wanted to have a baby during my PhD. So definitely, if any of you are considering that and have questions, I know it's a really personal topic, but I always try to be really open about it because I know it's not done that often. But kind of in my pre-mother life and, the beginning of my PhD, it was, kind of a combination of everything everyone said. I also spent a lot of time doing volunteer work. Volunteered with a fantastic organization called the Prison University Project, and I got to teach math at San Quentin, which was just really impactful for me. Also, me and my partner love to dance. We did some stuff with salsa at Cal and all of that great stuff. But yeah, I think being a parent is kind of a full-time job right now. So all of that is gone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much to all 4 of you for sharing. And as Harshad mentioned, this university is huge, and finding your place within it can be immensely difficult. So I wanted to ask you how you built up your mentoring and support networks during those first few years. How do you continue to build them up, if you do today?
I can start. It's I guess like the reason I pause is it's a hard question. I feel like I still am working on it. And I would say I don't think it's until maybe in the past few months that I've really felt like I've had solid mentorship. And interestingly enough, it wasn't from Berkeley, it's outside of Berkeley. I was able to do a research internship this summer at Adobe, and my mentorship team there has been fantastic, and I'm still working with them throughout the school year, and that's been really great. I think in the first few years, having a strong peer group was really great. So getting to know my cohort, getting to know, I'm in an interdisciplinary program, so you sometimes feel like you don't really fit in anywhere. So really taking the opportunity to get to know people across disciplines is really important, people in classes and stuff. And so I think that I kind of had a shaky time in my first few years with my advisors. I switched programs and had my advisor move to the other side of the country, and there was just a lot of turmoil. So having that peer group that was kind of all of us getting through it together was so important.
Just to echo some of what you were saying, Marissa, I feel like it would be disingenuous if I were pretending that I have this figured out already, because it is only in these sort of later years of the program I'm in that I've feel like I have a sense of the value of my time and of the type of people I want to work with. And at least in my program, I am fortunate that I don't need to work with the people I don't want to work with, and I can gravitate towards and work with the people who sort of buoy me up and support me and make time for me. So that's been a more recent development, but it has been a positive one in recent years. And I think it's just sort of persisting, seeing what's working for others, for friends, for peers and colleagues, and then finding your own mode of operating, because it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Yeah, I also echo what Marissa and Max said. This is definitely the toughest question of the six. I've really struggled with this. It's been super tough, and I think one thing I wish I knew right at the outset was that I should not depend on my advisor for mentoring. They are just way too busy people, so that's not where the bulk of my mentoring is going to come from. I wish I'd figured that out earlier. So it's mostly just been organic, just postdocs, a few other advanced students. And one thing which helped me, I mean, I wasn't planning it that way, but I wish I'd done it sooner. It was in, I think, year 3, I just decided to jump into an analysis because there was a data set lying around. And I'm like, I don't know how this is going to end up, but I'm just going to do it. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know the stats. I don't know the programming for it, but I'm still going to do it. And I think that was that really helped me pick up speed, because I could approach people with like very specific issues that I was facing, and then that helped me grow that helped me improve my skills. So I wish I'd done that in year 1, just like try and push some things aside and just jump into an analysis and come up with something.
That's all really helpful. Thank you so much. Santi, was there something you wanted to add? I don't want to put you on the spot. I know there were some, I think, internet issues.
No, it's can you hear me okay, actually?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry. Yeah, it's obviously the Wi-Fi in Stanley would break down when you're having to do a panel, but so it sounds like we're on question 3, which is yeah, so that's a really good question. I feel like I think what one of the previous panelists said was really important, which was at a certain point in my PhD. I mean, this might not be the case for everybody, but I realized that like the data support might necessarily come from my advisor, and so you kind of just have to. I feel like at every step of your way, from undergrad to like if you tacked in between, or and then when you start in grad school, like you kind of like pick up people corner, and I think that. At a certain point, probably when I was like doing my qualifying exam, I realized that these are the people that I will go to for like support, and I think the key to that was basically like just making sure that like I kept up with those people and kind of updated them on what was going on in my life, and also was invested in what was going on in their lives and that. So I have, like, for example, my undergrad PI is somebody that still writes letters of rec for me, and then I teched in between grad school and here. And so my PI from when I was teching and the graduate student that I worked with at that time are still people that I would say are probably the biggest support system that I have. And so it was really just a matter of like continuing to nurture those like relationships and things like that. And that's really where my like support network is. And then of course, obviously like friends from my graduate program and from, you know, Berkeley Science Review and things like that, we're also like part of it.
Thank you so much for that. So it sounds like for each of you, at least with the sample of 4, it's a pretty universal experience that mentorship is sort of an evolving thing that you continue to negotiate throughout grad school. And I know what an important part that is of feeling sort of secure in your grad school experience as you navigate it. And to broaden that a little bit and expand maybe upon that question of like security and support, it's no secret that grad school is incredibly stressful for a lot of people. And so I wanted to ask, what resources, what advice do you have for maintaining, improving your mental health and your stress levels while going through grad school?
I can go ahead and talk on that. I think Rashad mentioned in his introduction that he was doing martial arts and things like that, and I think that like, you know, whatever form of like exercise it looks like for you is probably like one of the most like important things that you can do, I guess for free, so to speak, in terms of like your mental health. Like I personally like I'm really into like cycling. Like I got really into cycling during the pandemic, and that has allowed me to like both see California and like do exercise and I guess stay in shape, but also it's just like really good for me to like, you know, like grad school kind of sucks in the sense that like you have a lot of these like long periods of time where you don't have like a win. And cycling, you know, at least like if you're like climbing a hill or something like that, then you know, that's like I guess an easy win or something like that, you know, and you feel good about it. And it's pretty good for like your mental health. I think also it's probably very important to say that like you should go to therapy as well. That's like probably one of the healthiest things that you can do for your mental health is like go and seek out help and use the resources, like either through your insurance through Berkeley or if you have fellowship or something like that. That's probably the healthiest thing to do as well.
Yeah, I totally echo that. I think my approach has been like 2 key things that I think really work for me. One is what Santiago mentioned about working out a lot, and the other thing was like just remembering that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and I need to enjoy this. It's going to take a while, and so I have like I believe that like take your time, like smell the flowers on the way, do a bunch of amazing things that you enjoy. Definitely don't tell your advisor that you're doing all those things, but yeah, it's not, don't like, I was like, I'm not going to set a target for myself that I want to finish in 5 years or 6 years or something. I'm learning. I really love what I do. It's fun. So I'll figure it out when it has to end. And I'm going to do all these other things on the side. You know, they take up time. I'm taking a language class which is kind of strange in year 5, but I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, it keeps me sane and it keeps the stress levels low. And then the physical activity and working out helps.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Harshad has to say. I think that for me, a big kind of breakthrough in my mental health was changing how I was thinking about grad school. I think at the beginning, there's kind of this idea to think of it more as a sprint. Like at least for me, I was like, okay, I got to get through this. And once I graduate, then I can do this, then I can have my life. And I felt like having that attitude of like, I have to get through and I have to sacrifice everything to get through in a certain amount of time was just breaking me. And so realizing that, you know what, I don't have to wait for my PhD to be over for my life to start, that I can, you know, I started a family while in grad school. I did other things that I was interested in. that I'm just enjoying this time and I'm less fixated on the end date, I think has been really liberating and has allowed me to, enjoy this process. And yeah, because it's long, at least for me, I did, a master's and a undergrad at Berkeley before I did my PhD. So I'm on, year 11 at Berkeley, and it's such a big chunk of my life. And so I think, yeah, that was a really big thing. It's just learning to enjoy it, learning to be less fixated on the end date.
Yeah, I think everything that has been said, I would just underline and emphasize again, and just to throw in something, just one sort of small thing that I've been trying to practice more is saying no more often. And that's very particular advice for a very particular kind of person. So maybe that's not what you need to hear right now, but I know we have so many different commitments and responsibilities and opportunities that are orbiting around us all the time. And it's hard to modulate, between these extremes of totally withdrawing and shutting down and being like, I do not want anything else on my plate right now. And then the overextending to the point of burnout. And I think a good way to protect your time and energy is to say no, be okay with saying no more often to different requests for your time and energy.
Thank you again to everybody for sharing. I'm also going to, Angelica shared the specific campus mental health resources. I'm going to share, this is a sort of a more extensive guide that's been put together by grad students that has sections on like mental health, also just like on sort of physical and financial necessities and all kinds of other things that might be useful. So feel free to take a look at that if you think it would be helpful for you. I guess for the last two questions, one of them will be looking forward and the last will be looking back. So in terms of post-PhD life, whenever that happens, not setting a deadline on it, as Harshad and Marissa said, I was interested, sort of going into your PhD program, what did you envision your post-PhD career trajectory to be like? And has that changed? And if so, how? Has that changed now that you're a fair bit of the way into the program, maybe seeing the light at the end of the tunnel?
I can change completely. I think I went in, like a lot of people, thinking I was going to be an academic, and I saw my advisor go through the tenure process. And I think, like a lot of people, I became really jaded just with the whole process. And I think not just me changing, I think the culture's changed a little bit, particularly, I work in computer science, and I think that industry is becoming more and more accepted, and having jobs that are combinations between industry and academia are becoming more and more accepted. I think almost all of the professors in the computer science department have some type of industry appointment in addition to their faculty appointment. And I think I'm starting to see that, I came from math before I was in computer science, where that was definitely unheard of. I think there's an attitude in math that industry is just your complete sellout. But seeing kind of the success of having more options in computer science, I think even my advisor, who is a traditional mathematician, but with an appointment in computer science, he got kind of his attitude changed. I'm seeing lots and lots of people's attitudes change. So I think now I have a vision of maybe still teaching, but not feeling like I have to go down the tenure track route. There's lots of people. I right now I have an internship as a research scientist in industry, and many people who do that, they often, some of them are tenure track professors in addition to being research scientists. I don't think that's what I want, but I think more what I'm looking at is maybe doing a lectureship in addition to being a research scientist. I think there's a lot more movement now between, it used to be once you went into industry, there was no coming back. But now we're seeing a lot more fluidity. So I think I have a lot more flexibility and hope about the future than I kind of did when I first started.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Marissa said, that I definitely has changed from the beginning when I started grad school. I've always kind of been like a planner, I guess, and I had like this like not necessarily a timeline, but I definitely had like, oh, I'm going to go to grad school here, and then afterwards I'm going to do a postdoc here, and it would be really nice to then do this other thing. Um, and I think that like one of the things that grad school has really taught me is that like, well, I mean, obviously nothing ever really goes according to plan, but even then, that it's also okay to be interested in other things and to, you know, realize that, you know, maybe you set a plan and you kind of just like focused on it and you kind of put it on this pedestal, but there are other things that you can do that will also like be extremely rewarding and just like bring you fulfillment, and you know, aren't necessarily part of your plan, but that just means that then you have to kind of like adjust your plan, or maybe your plan has multiple branches or something. So for me, in my case, it really came about from working through BSR, especially when I was like this past year when I was working as the art director for BSR, which was like something that I was like super nervous about because I don't like leading teams of people and I kind of get nervous presenting in front of people and things like that. But I just really enjoyed like leading a group of people together, like making art and talking about art and within the context of science. And it was just a lot of fun. And I don't know, I enjoyed it so much that like now, you know, even if my project goes according to plan and it you know, like everything else goes according to plan, I've been like setting my sight on applying to this New York Times fellowship instead of like going to a postdoc, so that way I can somehow merge science illustration with like science writing and communication, just because I just enjoyed this thing so much and it totally like blindsided me, but in a really good way, like in a really positive way. And so now I'm like really thinking like, okay, if I stay in academia, how can I incorporate like scientific illustration into it? Or if I like, how can I like bring with me like my skills and expertise in molecular biology and chemical biology that I've learned in my PhD and use it to communicate science and things like that. And it's actually even like resulted in like this summer, a friend whose article I illustrated for Berkeley Science Review, who's working at a biotech company, like reached out to me and was like, hey, we need illustrations for this like scientific thing. Would you be okay freelancing for us? And so over the summer, I was doing these illustrations for this like biotech company that works on dog aging. So I just like spent the whole summer drawing dogs for like, you know, doing scientific illustrations of dogs for like this company. And they paid me really well, which, you know, like that's kind of like another thing, but it was just like very fun and very rewarding. And it was still like, you know, like I was talking about like aging and proteins and DNA, but using science to convey it to like for a brochure that they needed to make. And I don't know, it really has kind of reshifted how I think about like my future and my future career.
I guess my response is a little bit different just because I think my attitude of the future has just sort of been reinforced by grad school, in the sense that I knew I would always have to, I knew I wanted to teach, and that in some future world I will be an educator of some form. But I've known that I love working with students of all ages and backgrounds. You know, I've done adult education, community college, I've done GED work. I've done, you know, literacy tutoring, public schools, private schools, undergraduates and graduate students, and looking at career prospects ahead. I know that I'll have to maintain that type of flexibility in terms of different career paths. So I guess I'm just sort of, I feel more confident now through grad school that like I can do these different roles. But at least for me, it hasn't concretized anything in terms of like, this is the path for me. There's a multitude of paths that I see open.
For me, so I worked for about 4 years with the World Wildlife Fund before I started my PhD. So I was pretty clear even before I thought of applying that that's what I want to do. And I think even now it's like, yep, that's what I want to go back into, because I like managing programs. I like doing things on the ground. Traveling to cool places, of course, doesn't hurt. So yeah, it's not really changed my perspective. I'm pretty sure academia is not really for me as a long-term option.
That's really helpful to hear. And I'm actually glad that there's sort of a variety of experiences represented here. So thank you again for all of you for sharing. In terms of the last question that I have before I open it up to the audience is, now looking back, what would you do differently if you could start your PhD again?
I can go ahead. I feel like several of the panelists have touched on this, but I think Harshad was the one who said it first about taking time off and like going, like going and doing traveling and stuff like that. I feel like I've only recently kind of slowed down and kind of stopped paying attention to the timeline, I guess. And I feel, and the thing about it is that it hasn't really changed, like from like the 4 years prior to this one. Like I could have slowed down that whole time and kind of enjoyed my time and not like pressured myself so much. Um, but I did. And now I feel like if I had, I'd probably still be in the same position that I am right now. Like I feel like all that pushing and kind of like forcing myself to work on weekends and things like that was like, I'm sure there was like a learning experience in some way, but I think it was kind of probably just needless torture to myself. And so I think if I'd started again, if I could go back in time and like talk to a younger me, I'd probably be like, hey, just like take it easy. Like that trip that you were like, oh no, I'd rather work, like just take it. And then your protein will be there when you get back and it'll still be doing its thing. So just relax. Yeah.
I think for me, the first couple of years I had pretty terrible imposter syndrome, and like everybody in the lab around me is like super smart. They're like publishing multiple papers already. I could barely write a line of code in an hour, and I really struggled with that until like sometime around end of year two. I was just like, you know what, I've already got in. So if anybody who has to feel bad, is probably my advisors for making the wrong decision. But I'm here. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to stop feeling bad about it. And I just from then on, it's been like I'm not competing with anybody else here. I just want to end up being a better, smarter, more capable version of myself by at the end of the PhD, and that's it. So I wish I had that approach from the beginning. It would have saved a lot of trouble and anxiety. But I'm glad I kind of sort of figured that out. And the other thing which again, if I started doing that earlier, it would have helped is I feel that I know it might be a little more challenging in other fields, but at least in my field, is it's like you should never stop trying to come up with new ideas for research or new ideas for analysis or a paper. Just keep coming up with them and keep a list. You never know when your main ideas or main questions fail, or when COVID hits and you cannot do an entire year's worth of fieldwork that you had planned and got money for and get permits for, and you have to literally change your entire dissertation. I think I was really saved by the fact that I had literally like just a note on my computer with like very rough, completely not thought through ideas, but a bunch of them. And I'm like, okay, I cannot do any field work, so I cannot get the data. I have to go back and look at this list. But I just wish I had done that right from the outset. It would have made life a lot easier and again, less stressful. It would have been a lot less stressful.
Yeah, I started in a different PhD program and it was a terrible fit. And then I switched into the one that I'm in now. So I think about this a lot, right? I think the obvious is I just would have applied into the program I'm in the first place. But that transition was so messy. And I don't know that there's much I could have done to make it better, because I think as a grad student, unfortunately, sometimes you don't have much power and you're just kind of having to do what your advisor wants you to do. But I think a lesson that I learned that I try to use as I go in the future is to just not be afraid to abandon bad paths. So, I think I identified that the program I was in was not in a good fit after my first year, but they wouldn't let me transfer into the new one because there was this idea that I had to leave on a good note. So I had to finish my master's, because I had to kind of prove that it wasn't a failure. And I wish that in retrospect, I don't think that master's serves me at all. I think that this idea that I had to kind of leave on a good note was not I spent a year trying to show that I could do it, but for what? We all knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do, but there was this feeling that I had to prove I could do it. And then of course it doesn't end there, right? It's like you prove that you can do that. And then they were like, well, you did all this work, now you should publish this paper. And again, it's, a direction I knew I didn't want to go in, or a direction that was not working for me. But there was this feeling that, oh, you've done all this work. If you don't finish it, if you don't publish this paper, then it's all a loss. So then I spent another year trying to get a paper out, and I have that paper, but again, it's in a discipline that I'm no longer interested in. And it took that much longer because it was work I didn't believe in. So, I went through 3 rounds of revisions of me, trying to convince the journal committee that it was worthwhile when I didn't even believe it was worthwhile. So of course that took so much longer. Like I said, I think that it wasn't totally my decision, right? When your advisor says you have to write this paper, sometimes you just have to write the paper. But I think that's something that I take forward with me now, where if something's not working, not everything has to be a paper, right? Sometimes you try something and you learn something from it, you realize it wasn't the direction it needs to go in, and stopping it and working on something that you think you're excited about that's new. I don't think that that's a failure just because the paper doesn't come out of it. Sometimes I feel like the paper is a failure, right? Like I feel like that paper was not the right choice for me, and that master's degree was not the right choice for me, and probably would have been better off if I had spent those 2 years doing what I actually cared about, instead of getting those papers and getting those degrees.
Yeah, I don't have much new advice or information to give, except that, yeah, it just can't be stressed enough that you should not give time to people, to faculty, staff that don't support you, and try to be present and give time to those who do. In particular, the first 2 years of my time in my program, I consider wasted time. There was literally no advisor for my cohort. And so it only was, going into my 3rd year that I finally received the advising I needed to figure out what sort of major literature and language I should go into. And that sort of set me back in the program in terms of, the all, important timeline of completion. It's not actually a big deal now, but I just for myself wish I had approached those first years more proactively and judiciously. And if I didn't, if I was skeptical of the advice I was getting and it seemed fishy to me or off, I should go find more authoritative advice elsewhere. And that's something I do now, but just following your instincts, your intuitions, and knowing you are a good judge of what you should be doing with your time is so important.
That's a lovely note to end on. You are a good judge of what you should be doing with your time. Thank you so much to all 4 of you for those wonderful bits of advice. I know for me personally, they are, even if they're not new things, they are very useful to hear again, try to internalize. So now I want to open the floor up to questions from the audience. And again, if you would like to raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask the question yourself, you can do that, or you can send your question to one of the logistics team and they can read it out loud, whatever you would prefer. Yes, Hira, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, everyone. This is a great panel. I had a question kind of based on something that Harshad, you mentioned about kind of at the end of your 2nd year, making this, what seemed like a very big mental shift from kind of being in competition with the people around you or kind of feeling a lot of imposter syndrome to no longer being in that mental space. And so kind of question for you, but also everyone on the panel, how do you go about like not comparing yourselves constantly to the other people around you or the like imagined other grad students that are just in your head and stuff?
I mean, it just, for me at least, it got to a point where it was not making sense and it was really counterproductive to my progress and my general state, like being happy. And I sort of realized that, I mean, for one thing, I do intend to do something fairly different from what most of my peers are planning to do, which is I was like, I'm not working in academia. I want to go back to a nonprofit role. So I'm like, okay, it's different. Like what I need to get out of the program is very different from somebody who wants a tenure track position, right? They need to have these amazing publications and all sorts of things. I don't really need that. I need to be a good scientist. I need to prove that I can do science, and that can help me get a great position in an organization that I care for. And that's my goal. It's not to publish a dozen papers by the end of my PhD. So I think once I kind of internalize that, and I'm like, it doesn't make sense to compare myself with anybody else, because what's the point? I mean, I'm just wasting my time and losing my way. So that helped me in like, yeah, what do I want to get out of this? What's my end goal in this whole process?
One thing that I just want to add to this is that so like I came into grad school not thinking that I was going to compete with people, but then it was kind of incepted into my mind because I had a conversation with someone from my cohort when we were just getting lunch and we were just talking about like random things, and in this conversation she mentioned that she was like intimidated by she was like from a different field going into like the field that I was in, and she mentioned that she was just like very intimidated by me as like a fellow grad student in the cohort because I already had a background in biochemistry, et cetera, et cetera. And it was like a very shocking thing to me because I never kind of thought that like we were competing against each other. We weren't even rotating in the same labs. We weren't working in really the same fields or anything like that. But it was like kind of a big shock to me. And I realized that like probably everybody feels this way where they're like kind of competing. And there was something about realizing that kind of like was, well, at first I was like, oh my gosh, should I be competing with other people? Like, is that how I should be thinking about it? But then later it kind of turned into like, no, like I shouldn't be, because I'm here to, like, I think Prashad said it earlier, where it was like, I'm here to like, you know, be better than I was yesterday or something like that, and I think that's really the right mindset to have. But once you realize that like most people feel the same way, where they're kind of feeling a little bit insecure, like they're kind of competing with everybody else, you realize that like, I don't know, it's in some way it's kind of a little bit freeing to know that everybody feels very insecure about this kind of stuff, and probably nobody needs to feel that way, right? And I don't know, that conversation, I think about that conversation a lot because it like really took me by surprise. I was like, oh, but like we're not competing, like we're friends, we're having lunch right now, like, and we're talking about science. And I don't know, I guess it's important to keep that in context that like everybody feels insecure about this kind of stuff, and and I don't know, it's pretty humanizing, I think, because otherwise you'll be in your head thinking, oh, I'm the only one that's like losing this competition, when in fact you're probably doing amazing, and you should keep doing the things that you're doing because you're doing amazing at them. So yeah.
Marissa or Max, is there something you wanted to add, or can we should we move on to the next question if there is any?
I think we can move on.
Yeah, my only plug was going to be something that I'm trying to practice myself, but it's not to sort of give in to or get overwhelmed with feelings of bitterness. I guess that came up for me, and I think you used the phrase here of like imagined other students, and there's a way in which I can sort of imaginatively produce a whole huge anonymous student body of graduate students, who are competing against me or are doing so much better than me. And it's this whole sort of like invisible arena that is of my own production that I'm making. And so whenever I feel myself starting to get sucked into it, like find myself in a sort of lunch situation, like you were describing, Santi, I try really hard to yank myself out of that sort of tailspin because it's just deeply unproductive. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Once again, if there are any other questions.
I want to ask something. So I think it was mentioned before about saying no and setting boundaries. And I know that can be a really difficult thing, especially in a professional setting. So yeah, if anyone any one of you have experiences on setting boundaries, and how did you like exercise that muscle in a way to a point where you feel comfortable, if you've gotten there? Yeah, and if you have any advice on how to do that.
I
Sorry.
can just kick things off since I think it makes me sound very misanthropic, but yeah, I'm a big fan of saying no these days. But it's hard, especially if you're sort of pivoting or transitioning out of a more accommodating mode of operating, because usually that's when you'll first sort of feel the pain, feel the burden that exercising that muscle, and possibly feeling pushback from people who are used to maybe or communities that might be used to sort of dropping different things and making yourself available for anything at any moment. And so it can be really hard right away. But I found that coming up with sort of like a rule for myself of literally like quantifying commitments or things like that. So like I'll only be able to have dinner with one person a week, going out for dinner, or I'll only be able to have one extracurricular, one sort of reading group that I'm a part of. And when I set those sorts of rules for myself, it makes it so much easier when other people come to me and ask, for other responsibilities or for me to show up, because I can simply say, my quota is sort of already met. Like I'm already at my limit, and it's less of me exercising some sort of personal discretion. And it's more of just like, them's the breaks, like that's how it works. But it's still hard. And because you're talking about respecting boundaries, and I guess I was taking that in terms of time boundaries, energy boundaries, but also personal boundaries with faculty, with staff, with other grad students. I think it applies for both sort of categories of commitments.
So for me, I think that was, so at least in my department or my lab or a couple of other labs that we work with, there's these strong traditions of doing lab papers or lab projects. And when I came in, I was just saying yes to everything because I didn't have any publication. I'm like, yeah, it'd be good to have a few publications on my CV. And then I realized that I'm really terrible at that. Like I say yes to everything, and then I'm in a bunch of papers that I don't really care about too much. I'm not excited about it, and I need to put in 2, 3, 4 hours of work a week. And it just, after like 2 or 3 papers, I was like, I mean, there was this, I thought that there was this sort of expectation that everybody has to be in it because it's a lab thing. But then after a couple of papers, I'm like, you know what, this is not working out for me, and I'm going to pass on this. It honestly doesn't matter if I have a publication in which I'm the seventh or the 8th author anyway, after like a few of them. So I'm like, nope, and I'm like noped out of a bunch of them. And I'm like, I think I'm really happy with that decision, although I don't know about my advisor, what he thinks about that. But yeah, so yeah, it just you know, figure out what works for you and just say no if it doesn't. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of saying no. And I think, the hardest thing for me, though, is the relationship with my advisor and the power dynamic, because I think while it's always been easy for me to say no to kind of some of the things that, Max and Harshad talked about of, peers and, all the workload, I found kind of early on in grad school that I tried saying no to my advisor and my no's were not heard. I'd be like, no, I don't really want to work on this project. And they'd be like, well, you have to, or no, I don't really want to write this paper. And it's just like, no, you have to. And I think slowly, with time, I've learned kind of maybe more subtle ways of saying no that have actually gotten my advisors to change their mind, and realizing what it is that they need to hear. And it's something that's always just been really hard for me, because I think I've always been a kind of stubborn person who's really valued my own autonomy, and recognizing that I don't have that has been hard. But coming in and just realizing that they don't always need to know what I'm doing. So I think one of the things is I really wanted to change the direction of my thesis, and I had experiences of trying to talk about it and just being said, no, you can't do that. But instead, I just kind of did it on my own and came back to them when I had something ready for publication and said, look, this is going to be published. And when I had that, then it was a completely different conversation. I was like, oh, maybe you can change the direction of your thesis. And so just recognizing that sometimes you don't always need permission, and that when you're in a dynamic where you can't say no, that sometimes just doing things on your own and coming back when you are in a position of more power can really help those conversations go a little bit easier.
Thank you all.
Santi, sorry, was there something you wanted to add?
Oh, I mean, one thing that Marissa said that I thought was interesting was about like basically like feeling the need to like, well, I mean, I guess this whole thing is about like saying yes to everything, right? And ways to manage that. And one of the things that I found, because I for sure like just for some reason just like have the need to like whenever somebody presents, or either when someone presents an opportunity or an opportunity presents itself, like there's just like very excitable self that I'm just like, yes, I'll say yes to everything, especially when somebody asks me to do something. And one of the ways that I found to like cope with that is that, I don't know, I guess maybe I feel like an obligation when someone specifically comes to me asking for a favor or something where I feel kind of, I don't know, obligated to say yes or something like that. So I think one of the ways that I've like learned to manage it is instead of saying yes, I'll provide an alternative. So I'll be like, I can't be part of this panel, but here's somebody else that I think would be like a really, really good option. Or I can't do this thing for you, but like I know of this other person, I think they would be like really excited, and just kind of understanding that you can't do everything, right? Because there's only 24 hours in a day, and your time is limited and stuff. That would be, I guess, my 2 cents on that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you again. I want to issue a last call for questions that you might have for the panel as a whole, and then we might transition into breakout rooms.